What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. I'm very, very excited. Oh, I'm always excited for episodes. I say this every single week that I'm always excited. But this week is something extra, extra special. And that is I'm getting a chance to sit down and chat to the Maestro himself. You don't really need to say much more than just the Maestro because he's a bit of a living legend. And it's going to be an absolutely fantastic chat going forward today. So if you've got any comments for the Maestro, please. I've got a couple of great stories. Obviously, he meets hundreds and hundreds of people a year, or thousands of people a year. I've got some great stories about the very first time I ever met Salvatore in the 2010 BNIC Cognac Summit. And I had no idea what I was doing there because I was with people like Jeffrey Morgenthaler, Eric Alperin, Salvatore, Peter Dorelli, Julie Reiner, Francesco. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I was a 29-year-old, 30-year-old Australian kid coming from Canada and hanging out with people like this. And it was one of the most pivotal moments of my whole entire life. So I'd love to, Salvatore's really enjoying himself at home. He's relaxing, which means we're going to have a fantastic conversation today. Welcome, Salvatore. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the introduction, by the way. I'm sorry for my casual wear, but I am at home. And when I'm at home, I am at home.
Look at me. I'm in my hoodie. I'm in my bar office or office
bar.
Yeah,
but you are working, man. I am at home.
We're always working. We're always switched on. Isn't that the way it is? How have you been? How's the last 12 months been? I saw you on LinkedIn a lot doing cocktails at the start of the pandemic and stuff like that. How's the pandemic been for you personally?
Well, it's been a strange time for everybody. I think, you can't describe it. You can't describe anything as such. I mean, it's a thing that it's almost like a horror movie. Tough for the economy, tough for people like us in the industry, tough for my family because both of my kids are in hospitality industry. So it's been real tough. See my team being furrowed. Close my bars, and you can't. It's hard to say you can have a smile in your face. You definitely don't have a smile in your face this time. I definitely don't have it.
Which is interesting because you've been in the industry for a number of years, a couple of years. How did you just a couple? How did you get your starts? Because I think you have one of I think I was in a clubhouse room the other week. And you and Peter were talking about the early days of London cocktail culture and stuff like that. And you sort of regaled the story of how you got in the industry. And it's literally one of the most romantic hospitality stories. Like if we talk about a stereotypical romantic story of getting into the industry, yours is definitely one of those. How'd you get started?
Well, I started in 1966 as a child, really. I was 11 years old. And which in those days, I come from the Amalfi Coast, so it's a very tourist place. And in those days, it was not unusual to see a child work or help out, work in a restaurant or work in a coffee shop or in the local bar. And, you got to understand that in Italy, we have a very long summer holiday for 4 months almost. So my dad thought it was the best thing for me to do is to get a little job, A, to have a little pocket money, and B, to keep me out of the street. And he found me this job in this charming small Hotel Regina in Maiori on the Amalfi Coast. And that was it. I could not say no. That was my task. That was my duty. And I used to start every morning. I used to get up around 6 o'clock in the morning, and I used to go to the hotel restaurant. And my very first duty was to slice bread for the people for breakfast. But each slice of bread had to be precise. It had to be the same. So I become to be very particular, so much so I even put a little mold to make sure that my slice of bread would fit in that. And and I used to do that from 6 to 7. Just in that hour, I used to do all kind of different things for breakfast for the restaurant. But then my second duty, my job for the day, it was to go to this small little bar, charming little bar, and switch on the coffee machine and clean up the bar, the glassware that were left behind, anything that I had to do. And the bar was run by a gentleman called Signor Raffaello. He was a real pro. I mean, he was a real pro. He used to wear this impeccable cream jacket, and he could make the dream come reality to anyone who used to come and see him. He was a bit of a playboy. He certainly loved his women, and he could speak several languages. He traveled the world, and then obviously later in his life, he decided to make a living in his own town. It's around the Amalfi Coast, and there were my journey of hospitality and love affair with this job really start. I could truly say that I didn't choose the bar chose me, really did. I remember that, Signora Fellow, one thing he told me, a lesson. He taught me a lesson that I still use today. Anytime I do a lecture or a talk or I teach some of the bartender when they start, he told me what means hospitality and what means read the people. I mean, every morning, as I say, I used to switch on the coffee machine, clean the bar, and by 8 o'clock, I used to bring the coffee to the chef. And every morning, I used to go into the kitchen. As I would walk into the kitchen, I used to say, "Good morning, Chef Alfonso." And the chef was sitting at the far end of the kitchen waiting for his coffee, but he never used to raise his eyebrow to me. He never used to say nothing. A typical moody type of chef. And I used to walk away. But one day, as I walk into the kitchen, I say, "Good morning, Chef Alfonso." He wasn't sitting at his usual place, but he was actually cleaning a very large fish. And as I walked in, he looked at me and said, "What's so good about it?" And he grabbed that fish and he threw the fish at me. I caught that fish. The fish was half the size as I was, and I fell down on my back, facing this fish. The chef came over, picked his fish up, and walked away. And even at the age of 11, I was curious. I said, "What did I do to upset the chef?" So when Signor Raffaello came, I told him the fishy tale. And he, in a very simple way, made me understood what meant what I had, where I felt. When what he told me, he said, you haven't read the mood of the person who is in front of you. Not every customer wants you to bring the sun to them. Sit down, let them sit, let them relax, let figure out what they really truly want. Do they want me to be full of sunshine, or do they want me to be discreet and say, "Good evening, madam, good evening, sir, how are you tonight?" And a little bit about little bit, and then eventually you get to know them, and eventually you might bring the sun to them. But don't presume that everyone wants to be treated the same only because you feel cheerful. It's a very great lesson.
Wow. And then you were
Be,
11.
be, yeah, people reading the people in front of you. That's a great start.
Is the hotel still there?
Oh yes, the hotel's
Yeah.
still there. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. And you still visit
yeah.
regularly, I'm guessing?
Oh yes, every summer I do go there. I mean, the wonderful thing on those days as well in the '60s was it was the real truly the Dolce Vita time, you know, where everyone, it didn't matter, before they were going for dinner, they used to dress up. The men were wearing the jacket, they were wearing maybe a tie, the beautiful lady, they all dressed up. It was that kind of a feeling. It's not like maybe today that, 6 o'clock in the evening, you come from the beach, you come into the restaurant with shorts or in the bar. And those days, people would then they care for their elegancy. There was a kind of a different type of culture, and people knew what to drink. The Americano was very much in the beginning of the day, and the Negroni, the Martini, the Manhattan, all those drinks that I used to see going out in the early evening. Fantastic. It was real fun.
When was the first time you got exposed to the sort of cocktail culture outside of that, when you actually started to actually fold into it, where you started exploring your own sort of curiosity in cocktails and bartending, and sort of building on that those few years from 11 till, I'm guessing, 16, 17, where you
Well,
were
I
cutting bread?
no, I did. I worked with Signor Raffaello from the age of 11 to the age of 14, 15. And then I moved in the restaurant. And by the age of 21, I was the youngest maitre d' in all the Amalfi Coast. I had a team of 27 people under me. And most of those guys were the guy who taught me, and the simple reason is because I had a dream. My dream was to be a captain of a ship, right? And I studied for that. But unfortunately, when I was 17, I had an accident which left my left eye almost blind. So I can't see well with my left eyes. And I failed the physical test. So I joined the Navy and I failed the physical test. So I got stuck really with my second love, hospitality, the things that I used to do in the summer. And that's when I really start to really get involved. And I start to say, okay, if that's what I need to do and this is what I like to do, I start to, in the winter time, I start to travel. I travel across Europe. And every place I was going, I was pick up a different style of culture, different way of service. And I used to bring that with me. And eventually, I began to be a leader, and which was great. But then I met my wife in 1976, and in 1980, I went to London and I made my life there, here actually. And I started working some restaurant, Italian restaurant, the usual thing. And then I wanted to go back to the hotel. And actually, my wife found the job advertising and illustrating in the evening standard, Duke's Hotel looking for bartender. So I went for an interview, and obviously my CV was all about Metro D and not a bartender. And but I liked the place. And but they asked, they told me, it's Mr. Calabrese, thank you very much. But your CV is all about Metro D, not a bartender. And I was quite insisting, and I said, listen, I've done the bar, I know a lot about the bar, I love the bar, and I think I can do it. So they gave me a go, and I started at the Dukes in 1982, the 3rd of December 1982. By the 23rd of December 1982, they called me in the office just before Christmas, and they said, thank you very much, Mr. Calabrese. We have found a bartender that fits for our need. So thank you very much. Bye bye. So I said, oh, blimey, Christmas at home. And but then the 27th of December 1982, they called me back. Basically, what happened? You need a bit of luck in life, and it was a very cold winter. And one of the customer, while I was there, asked for a hot toddy to the bartender, who he decided that he should borrow the flambe from the restaurant and make a hot toddy in front of the in front of the customer on top of the counter, the bar counter. But unfortunately for him, and fortunately for me, the the paraffin went on the counter and the flames started. So he burned the customer and the bar. So his career went up to a smoke, and mine started with a flame. And they called me back, A, because some customer were asking for me, and B, therefore I was a good choice. And I start officially the 27th of December 1982. But what made me different, it was that I always have the philosophy that you look after the house and the house will look after you. And at the Duke's, it was a very small bar, only six table, right? I could only accommodate up to 20 people maximum. So I used to have a percentage of the income of the taking, right? A very small wages, but We used to have a percentage of the, we used taking a percentage of the taking. So I started to think, how am I going to make more money here? And obviously not by quantity, so I need to create a quality. And there where I come out with this incredible concept of selling liquid history. A concept that was very unique at the time. Virtually, I thought about, I was in London, very historical town, Duke's, a very historical name. I had a lot of history around me. One thing that was missing behind the bar was a little bit of liquid history. And if you really think about it, how can we be part of the history? We can see it, we can read it, we can feel it, touch it. But one thing we could not do at that time is tasting it. And it was a bit of a crazy idea, but I managed to convince the owner at that time and the team, the management team, to back me up financially. And I started to look for and search for some very ancient spirits, and especially cognac. And so I started to sell cognac from 1811 when Napoleon was marching over to Russia the year before the French Revolution, 1789, American Constitution. George Washington was just be president of the United States, and all this really crazy idea of 1860, the beginning of the Civil War, the 1865, and you name it. I started to search and find, and that became to be the crazy guy who sell liquid history, the Italian crazy bartender who sell history by the glass. But by having this idea, I took that little bar which was making an average between £400 to £500 per week, up to £10,000 a table.
Wow.
And that's the difference. And so I was making more money. Everybody was talking about it, and it was unique and different. If you wanted to impress somebody, what a better way to come to my bar and to taste something when Thomas and Jefferson was around, or Lincoln was around, or anything of which is historical. And again, but really, what really put me on the map, it was my way of making my dry martini. In 1985, I always say that God took 6 days to create the perfect world. It took me 5 to create the perfect martini. And the simple reason was because I had this customer, an American customer, Stanton Delaplane, who was staying at the hotel for a week, who, from the very first day, when he used to come in the late afternoon, he used to have a two martini cocktail. But he was very specific how he wanted his martini. And he used to say, Salvatore, may I have a very dry but very cold dry martini? And I used to say, of course, Mr. Delaplane. So therefore, I used to put lots of ice in the mixing glass and stir the drink longer than normal to make it cold. And he used to say, yes, this is cold enough, but it's not dry enough. So the second martini I was make it drier but less cold. And he used to say this time, yes, it's dry, but it's not cold enough. And this was the first encounter, the very first day. The second day was the same again. The third day was the same again. It was very specific how you want this martini. And I have learned in this industry, I learned that whatever the customer wants, that's what the customer should have. And I'm glad I did that because I persevere. Because if I would be an arrogant bartender, I could easily say, "Listen, this is the way I make your martini. So therefore, if you don't like it, that is the door. Go away and go and find some other place which they make the martini the way you want it." But I'm glad I didn't, because now I am here talking to you and to your audience about my type of journey through my experience. And yeah, so the fourth day, so it was a Friday, and I noticed that it was here we serve a very typically fish and chips on the Friday, and the staff canteen on that day was serving fish and chips. And I noticed one kitchen porter, it was a very particular how much malt wine want on his chip. So he used to move the chips away from the plate and put a dash. There was a dash bottle, dash of malt wine. Like, well, that's clever. Now I know how to make it, how to control the dryness. So I took that little dash bottle, took it upstairs, washed it, put dry vermouth inside. Now I need to make it cold. On those days, I had that behind the bar of the Dukes, it was only 7 foot bar, very small, 2.5 meter, big enough to have a sink that I used to wash my glass for 12 years, a picnic basket that I used to have my ice underneath the sink, a little station where I used to have my glasses, and then a domestic fridge, which with a little freezer, a little freezer big enough to put one bottle of gin and two glasses. On the fifth day, Mr. Delaplane came back after his walk and he said, "May I have a very dry but very cold dry martini?" And I said, "Of course, Mr. Delaplane." So I picked up the mixing glass. I put ice in the mixing glass. Picked up the glass from the freezer, which was very, very cold. Then I picked up the bottle from the freezer, which was very, very cold. And don't ask me. I opened the bottle and I decided to pour it directly into the glass. Then I lay the vermouth on top, so create the aroma, and the twist of lemon, and I give it to him. He tasted. He didn't say anything. He finished the drink. He didn't say anything. He didn't complain. He asked for the same again because he was a two martini man. And because he did not complain, I gave it to him in the same way, the direct martini, directly in the glass. And I gave it to him. He took one sip, and he walked away. And I said, "My God, this guy every day had this complaint in a way that it was never dry enough and never cold enough, and now he didn't say anything." But few hours later, he came back down and introduced himself for who he was, Stanton Delaplane, a very famous journalist who used to write for the San Francisco Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and there where he wrote, "If you ever come to London, you must make a stop to the Duke's Bar, where Salvatore will make you the best martini cocktail in the planet." And every
Wow.
time he used to come back, he used to write about it. So the fame it became that the Dukes start to have a name for the direct martini, the very unique way we used to do at the table, is to pick up the little the table and put the bottle in front of the customer and make the martini. And today the Duke's Bar is still famous
I've
for
had
his
one.
martini. Yeah.
I'm just curious because it's 1985, and I like to put context in because there's obviously a lot of young bartenders out there. Where was this fountain of knowledge sort of coming from? Because even classic cocktail books were difficult to get and really not even well known. Like Jerry Thomas and Harry Johnson wasn't even in the vernacular of most bartenders in the 80s. And it's not like you had a smartphone where it was like, I need a bottle of 1811 cognac. Where do I go pick that up? Where was this
Well,
fountain of knowledge and like where was all this information coming from for
well,
you?
I am a very if I believe in something, I search, I look for something. Every time in any challenge that I have done in my life, and in those days, it wasn't easy. But there is a saying: if you are in Australia and you're looking to find your way to Rome by asking, eventually you will reach Rome, right? And what I did, I start to go to old wine shop like Berry Brothers in St. James Street,
Mhm.
which is from the 1770. That shop, one of the oldest wine merchant maybe in the world. And then I went to auction and see what they were selling. Remember, there was no market for
Mhm.
all spirits. Really, truly, there was no market for spirits. Actually, people, the older the bottle, the more they were staying away from the bottle, right? And I could truly say I create that market, of all cocktail, making original cocktail with the original ingredient for when the cocktail was created, And so I started to look, and eventually there was a wine shop, a wine connoisseur. It was kind of a. He told me Bernard. That's it, Bernard. He said, "I think I can help. I have an uncle of mine who has an incredible all spirits in the cellar, and he always asked me, what shall I do with that? And I said, Bernard, I like the idea. Let's go and have a look. And in the whole cellar, remember the British always been a great collector of artwork and also for cognac, port, because they love their wine, the culture, think about the association of all the British with the cognac house, they were very much British in that respect. So I go into this old wine cellar, and it was a little treasure there, and a very old dusty bottle and everything else. So I took one at that time. I said, "Can I have this one?" And let me see. And it was a bottle of High 1914, the beginning of the beginning of the Great War, obviously. But it was an incredible year because it was known also as the year of the lady, and the lady actually made that refined cognac at that time. And so I took one bottle just to have a look, obviously to prove that I could do it. And I sold that bottle in a week at £25 just by presenting the bottle and the historical aspect of that bottle. And from there on, I thought I think I can do it. So I went back and I took everything. I took absolutely everything that he
Wow.
had, and then there was not. No stop. I mean, really, no stop. I mean, you used to have people like Mick Jagger, Bon Jovi, Santana, the Moody Blue, Sean Connery used to come for his martini. It was the place that Paul McCartney it was the place where the best kept secret in the world in London, because after 11 o'clock you could not be served. But if you would have come at the Dukes and I started to get to know you, everybody became to be resident. And it was real fun. It was real fun. So there was two things going on with the Dukes. At the beginning, the martini, obviously in '85. So everybody used to come for the dry martini in the early evening, and then they used to come back for their fine spirits. I mean, I used to sell five vintage port by the glass, unheard of. A port and starting from 1970, 1966, 1963, 1955, and 1945, all served by the glass. And as you know, port, once you open, you have a
Mhm.
short life. You need to sell it. And so people used to come for fine port, for fine cognac, for fine whiskey. I mean, I wish I kept some of the whiskey that I opened on those days. That'd be worth a fortune now.
It
But
would be
mind you,
unfortunate.
I mean, I used to be honest with you, whenever I used to, then I obviously I come out, I create a network, and I used to get to know collectors, and became to be kind of a known an expert. And today I'm reputed to be one of the world leading expert on vintage cognac. I wrote a book, Cognac as a Liquid History, which is in the British Library. And so from an idea, I became to be passionate and an expert. And I'm also knighted. I'm a Chevalier de Cognac, one of the few in the world. So I persevere. I mean, on those days, I used to find some old whiskey or some old liqueur and some old rum. I used to serve. I find some two bottle of old 17 years old Nephew's rum that I wish I kept at least one bottle. And I used to do Mai Tai, the original Mai Tai at that time. Stupid of me if I knew that bottle is worth about £50,000, today, and maybe even more if you could find it. And I used to do, whenever I used to come across some unusual bourbon from 1890, I had some Angostura bitter from 1900. So I used to do the original fashion of the date when the old fashioned was created. And the same again with the martini. I've done the world oldest martini by using a gin from 1900, orange bitter from the 1900, 1899 actually, and Nolly Pratt from 1890. So virtually, when the martini was created, the dry martini was created, that's the way I done it, the original way. And I did that in Vegas, at my bar in Vegas. And I did the world oldest Negroni 2 years ago, 2019, to celebrate the 100 years of the Negroni, of the creation of the Negroni. I recreated the Negroni with the original ingredient that when Conte Negroni was around. Today, I have by far one of the finest collection. I own one of the finest collection of vintage spirits that there is in the world. All kind of different things.
Do you think that's the sort of the beauty of it? Like, 'cause I know that collectors, especially these days, when you said there was no market for vintage spirits, did that sort of take a bit of pressure off you back in those days to mix with these things? Because now, like, people like who collect spirits, they don't want to crack them, they want to keep them sealed. And you're like, but that's not really what they're for per se. Like,
Well, I open thousands of these bottles, thousands. I could truly say that. I open up a bottle that your eyes will have a tears down. From 1770, 1768, and 1788, and make the world oldest cocktail. Create the world oldest cocktail and the most expensive cocktail in the world. I think those spirits. Remember, especially with the cognac. If you imagine 2,000 years ago, when the Romans developed their empire, right? As they used to travel all throughout Europe, France, UK, everywhere else, Germany, they had the culture. They used to love their wine. So they used to bring the roots of the wine with them and implanted that. So imagine all those plants that they would establish, they would put down 2,000 years ago. In the early part of 1860, 1870, there was an illness here in Europe which destroyed most of the vine all around Europe. Okay, the phylloxera. All right. Now imagine the grapes of the wine that made those cognac from the 1700, 1800, right? Pre-phylloxera, which you really not only ran his own right, but also a different style of wine, grapes. And I could truly say that I have some incredible experience of tasting this incredible cognac that they cannot be reproduced again, ever again. You know and which is wonderful. I mean, you give to a customer the opportunity to taste something when one of their hero might be around. I remember once I had one customer. He came to my bar and he said, "Salvatore, I read so much about you that I came here for an experience." Now he did not look very dressy or somebody who had a lot of money with him. But I always learn never read a book by its cover. So he said, "Can I have an experience?" So I said, "Of course." So I started bringing some of my old cognac to the table. And eventually I finished off with a bottle of 1802. And there were two shots left in that glass. So, and that time, I was selling that. I mean, I'm talking about in the 80s, about £500 a shot, right? So I say, look at this bottle. This is an 1802. You think about Thomas Jefferson just become to be the president of the United States. Napoleon was declared himself, well, he was marching over to Corsica to conquer Corsica, to make Corsica his, and today Corsica still belongs to France, right? So you think about all that history, but as soon as I mention it, Thomas Jefferson, he knew everything about it, Thomas Jefferson. He was his greatest hero in the way of a president. Because he was an incredible knowledgeable person in wine. He was a American ambassador in France, and when he left France to go back to America, the French government gave him and produced for him a different type of bottles with his initial, Thomas Jefferson, TJ, which, Chateau Lafite, Margaux, and Decam from Thomas Jefferson Hero, which they became to be one of the most expensive wine in the world, really. And yeah, so I told him about that, and he said I will have a shot. Now, bear in mind, it's £500 a shot, right? A drink. So I served him one, and I walked away. After a little while, I went back to him, and I leaned over to him, and I noticed that he had a little tears in his eyes. And I thought, I hope he's not crying because he's thinking how much this bloody drink's costing him, right? And so I leaned over to him and I said, "Is everything okay?" And there he is. He did something really superb. He picked the glass up, he raised the glass at me, and he said, "Here I am, drinking and finish a part of history, something that I will never be able to do for the rest of my life." And that's the beauty. Sometimes, you go out, you spend £500 for a pair of shoes or maybe a suit, and you might wear it once and you're never going to talk about it. But once you're tasting something that you know that is so rare that only a few people in the world would ever be able to do it, that was the magic.
Wow. So after Dukes, where was the turning point in your career? Because you've had for cocktail books, you're one of the very first bartenders in this modern age of cocktails to write a prolific cocktail book.
Mm.
Um, you've you've had some fun stuff. Like a big highlight for me was when you're trying to make a cocktail with Schumacher in a car while he's burling around. Was it he's in a Ferrari and you've got basically a cocktail tray in your lap and you're trying to make cocktails. And
Well, I was wearing the cocktail at that
yeah,
time.
there was a fair few choice words to Michael on some of the corners. You're in the Guinness Book Records for the most expensive cocktail. Obviously, we talked about the oldest cocktails. There's a story about a gentleman you breaking a whole entire bottle of vintage spirit. Um,
Please, why do you have to bring that to light?
he
Yeah,
replaced it though, didn't he?
yeah, well, yeah, I'll tell you the story.
But like where was that transition from the notoriety at Duke's to expanding, and we call it personal
Well,
brand these days, but like expanding into your own bars and everything else?
well, basically, I was at the Dukes from 1982 to 1994,
Wow.
and I worked there for 12 years, and I truly enjoyed every bit of that. Otherwise, I would have not last that long. It was the place which gave me a lot of opportunity. I mean, as I say, I had the opportunity, create the perfect martini, which I was lucky enough to be requested by Her Majesty. So I made martini for Her Majesty. So my martini has a true royal crest. I serve martini for several presidents of the United States for a private party. I serve anybody that you could truly believe and think. I met people like Fidel Castro, Nelson Mandela, you name it, I met. So my journey has been incredible, and well, in '94, a new hotel was opened in London, well, which opened in '91, and the bar was truly unknown, the Lanesborough, the Library Bar. So my wife convinced me to one step ahead in a way because it was lovely to have a place like the Dukes, but I used to work on my own. It was a very small team. So the Lanesborough, I developed it was a bigger bar. I had a team that I could share my knowledge, and it became to be the real theater of the bar industry. There where I really start to concentrate more on the cocktail making and bring a fresh ingredient. Remember the 90s, cocktail was very much known. Cocktail was something that when anyone would ask you for to make a cocktail, you would use the cheapest whiskey that you have, the cheapest gin that you have, or whatever it was. It was about cheap ingredient, not deluxe ingredient. So I start to make the difference. I start to say, okay, fine. all my drinks, they have to be refined. And so I start to put the canvas into the drink by using a premium brand, modern cheap brand. And I started using fresh ingredients, not sweet and sour mix, but actually make the sour fresh. I start to make a name for the bar to be a theater. I always said the bar is one of the greatest theater that there is. The better you act, the more people come to you. Remember, the bar is a social place where people would like to, maybe where you are in a position to make the dream come reality for somebody, where you can, join a couple together in a way, introduce a couple together. So I'm responsible for few wedding, quite a lot of wedding, and also for few divorce. Not that was not my fault in that respect. But I think that's the beauty of the Lanesborough. And then at the Lanesborough, I developed the name as the Maestro with my team. So now everybody in the industry called me the Maestro. And in those days, in 1995, a publisher became to be a regular coming to an English publisher came a regular coming to the bar, and he asked me if I want to write the book, and I said okay. And he said, well, what we're looking for is a book with 100 recipes that you think that they're classic, 6,000 words. So I said, okay, I didn't even know what meant 6,000 words. So I took like what I usually do, I took the task on board and I finished off to write a book with 26,000 words. And I presented to him. But what I did on those days, a very unique book. And why was it unique? Remember, the biggest dream for any bartender is to be able to immortalize yourself with a great cocktail in 100 years' time. Somebody is still talking about. Think about old fashioned. Think about Manhattan, the martini, the person who created those incredible drinks, right? And we are today still doing that, and people still ask for it. So it is a dream. But every book I used to find used to talk about the recipe, but never about the creator. So it was just a recipe book. So in my book, on those days, when I published in 1996, what made a difference is that I started to talk about the creator, the person who was behind the recipe. So it was a storytell, right? I even wrote 5,000 words just about the martini. I always say, God created the world. Who created the bloody martini? I really got no idea. Really don't. And still today, I really don't know who created the martini. There is so many stories. And so it was different. It was not just a cocktail book. It was a bit of history, knowledge, fun to read. And that book sold over a million copies. Then I wrote 14 books now, and my fifth book, actually, this is I have to show it to you. This is the classic cocktail. This is my update version of my very first book, beautiful book. But this one is the success. This is a home bartender's guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
This officially is the book, the most so what did I say, the world best-selling cocktail book ever. Okay, so there is no other book like this in the cocktail world that has sold as many as this, right? And this sold millions, and which I'm very pleased because obviously it's an easy book to read. But that's what made the difference. And I wrote that book, and that was the beginning of my success in the publishing world. And so that's a and it took me to America, where I met my friend Del DeGroff. I did my very first pop-up bar, the very first pop-up bar in 1997, when I launched my book in New York, and I did it at the Rainbow Room, with Del DeGroff. And I remember when Del told me, he said, Del, he said, Salvatore, what you want to make? What drink do you want to make? What should we do for the launch of your book? And I said to him, my breakfast martini. And he looked at me and said, what? Breakfast martini? What is a breakfast martini? I said, Del, my breakfast martini is done with gin, control, lemon juice, and orange marmalade. And he looked at me and said, what? Orange marmalade? Are you out of your mind, man? Anyhow, so we decided to make it, so, and we had to do it for over 400 people. So we finish off, me and Del pick up this big canister, big pot, and start to dilute the marmalade in, because the marmalade had to dilute. I wasn't very popular with Del de Groff at that time. I wasn't. Yeah.
That's incredible. So when did you make the leap into your own bar, like owning bars and sort of, because there's always a
Well,
direction bartenders can take. Like you've taken one route already, like the publishing books and pop ups and educationals and stuff. Like bar ownership is a different
it's a
route,
different
and
thing.
it's
Well,
polar.
I can proudly say, I think I've done everything that the bartender is dreaming on, right? Made myself a name with something unique like liquid history and become an expert in a subject. I can say that I immortalized myself with several cocktails. I immortalized myself in my books, and obviously when the opportunity came to me, in 2004, I opened my very first bar, Salvatore 50 St. James, which became to be one of the most known bar in the world at that time. And yes, and it was not easy. It was very worrying because it's something that is yours. It's something that you have the name on the door, but also you have to pay the bill in one of the most luxurious residential area, Mayfair, that there is. So you could easily go down very quickly. And but I made it happen, And the 50 St. James, Salvatore 50 St. James was my very first bar. Then I opened Salvatore Playboy Club and the partnership with Hugh Hefner in 2005. Then I opened up in Vegas, Salvatore Bound in Las Vegas, the Cromwell Hotel. I opened up in Vegas, Salvatore Mixologist 101, which is still there. And then Hong Kong, I opened in Hong Kong, in many different places. And doing lots of consulting work with the spirits industry and with the operators. And next month, I open my very first bar in Italy. Would you believe it? In
Wow.
Palermo, of all place. Yeah, yeah, Villa Jam, a beautiful, iconic villa, hotel. Beautiful. I'm very proud of that.
That's
And
amazing.
you know,
I don't want
and
to take
then
up too much.
obviously, in London, I have this beautiful bar called the Donovan Bar. That if you ever come in London, in Mayfair, at the Browns Hotel, inside the Browns Hotel, I think it's one of the most beautiful design bar that I have ever done.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time, because I know that
No, it's okay. No, don't
it's
worry.
just I've just been in awe this whole, like, this last hour. While we were in the green room, because it's a fun story, and I think that Steve would be very upset at me if I did not bring up his name during this interview.
Oh,
Um, but a gentleman who went to the same high school as me. Now, I'm going to preface all this, and I talked about this in the green room. Like, I come from a very, very, very small country town. Like, the town that I actually grew up away from my high school was like 21 kilometers away. Like, we'd catch a bus every day to the high school. And I think my graduating class for high school was like 62 people. That's how small our high school was. And it was always incredible that a kid who was a year below me reaches out to me probably 10 years ago now, and connects with me on Facebook, as everybody did 10 years ago, and said he was in London working with you, and
at
to have two,
Salvatore 50.
yeah, and to have two Australian kids living abroad doing the same sort of job in the same sort of sphere was just super weird. And so when Steve, and your story about Steve getting a job there, it actually is a little reminiscent of some of your experience getting work yourself, like at Duke and at the hotel. talking
Like,
to in Amalfi Coast, like that sort of persistence and that sort of way to work an angle. And you got to tell the story, because I think this is a good value piece
well,
for kids who want
well,
their dream job.
I mean, Stephen McDermott it's a guy that I respect a lot. Is one of my students. I say, I took him under my wing, and I'm very proud of him. He came to my bar looking for a job, and he did not succeed, obviously, but he persevered. One day he went back to the Lanesborough, my old place, the library bar, and met one of my regular customer, actually one of my best customer, Don Steen. Don Steen was a very, very wealthy South African guy, and he got to chat with him, and he started to, because Stephen is a very chatty guy. He's very easygoing, and then he was saying something to Don Steen, who apparently, Don Steen is not only one of the wealthiest men in Africa, in South Africa, but he also owned the house where Nelson Mandela came out and went and lived there. And now this house where Nelson Mandela came out, when Nelson Mandela came out from prison to live there, is an exclusive hotel, the Saxon Hotel, all right, in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Anyhow, he eventually got to chat with this Don Steen, and eventually he said to Don Steen, I really would love to go to 50, to visit Salvatore. I can't get there because I'm not a member. And Don Steen said, don't worry, he said, come with me. So off they went in their Bentley, in his Bentley, and they popped in the front of my bar, come out. And obviously, when I see Don Steen, I welcome him. And then I saw Steve, so what is he doing? Him and Don Steen, and eventually, we start to talk, and eventually he said, I really would love to work here. I said, well, you're a man who really knows how to persevere, and I like that. So I gave him a chance. And he started as a barback. But one of the most beautiful thing about Steve, he really took the art of bartender to his heart. And after 2 years, he won the competition in the United Kingdom in the United Kingdom for the best bartender in the UK. So I was very proud of Steve, So, and now, I went last year, 2 years ago, I went to Australia to visit him to his
Mm.
bar. It's a fantastic story. But regarding the world oldest cocktail, okay, when I decided to break the Guinness Book of Record, my intention was to make the world oldest cocktail. But the Guinness Book of Record would not recognize old. It had to be the most expensive.
Ah.
So I made the world's most expensive cocktail with the liquid that, it's not by putting a diamond in the glass. It
Mm-hmm.
was just a true, pure gold, liquid gold, basically. So I still make the world's oldest cocktail and the most expensive cocktail up to 750 years of history in one glass. Imagine. Kummel from 1770. Cognac from 1788. The year before the American Constitution, George Washington was making his campaign to become the very first president of the United States. Australia was discovered at that time because you are an
Yes, it
Australian guy.
was. It
Captain
was
Cook, right?
1788.
1788. Then I use an orange curacao from 1860 and an Angostura bitter from 1900. All these four ingredients made over 740 years of history in a true liquid gold and liquid history.
That's
Something that
amazing.
no one else in the world would ever be able to do it. Certainly, they can make them more expensive, but they could never make them the oldest.
So one last question before I let you go.
Yeah,
This has just been an amazing. I'm always very fortunate because I think we talked about that when I introduced you at the Cognac Summit. Like for me in 2010, I've been in the cocktail game for maybe 12 years around then, and based here in Canada, in Victoria, BC, which is a very small city on the west coast of Canada, and then having this opportunity. And I remember looking at the guest list. I'm like, why? How am I even in the same realm as all these people? So I'm very fortunate that through bartending and through hospitality, I get an opportunity to meet and hang out with people like you. The one of the stories from the BNIC summit that I remember is the very last night. I think it was the Hennessy. They took us out to that barn, and
Yeah.
basically everybody got a bottle of Hennessy XO and cigars and stuff. And the cocktails were horrible. Like the cocktails were just really, really bad. A bunch of young cognac kids trying to make cocktails that were just, you're in a barn in the middle of the countryside that you can't really expect too much. And it was you and Peter Dorelli with literally everybody standing around you in the barn, and you two just riffing as you always do when you two to get together about the early days in London, and everybody just smoking cigars, drinking Hennessy XO, and listening to you two just chat about the industry. By far was one of the most epic experiences of my life, and surreal. Like in this barn in the countryside of Cognac, drinking Hennessy XO, smoking cigars with Salvatore Calabrese and Peter Dorelli. But
I mean, Peter's my best friend, really is. We've been friends for 35 years now. God.
wow. So one last thing before, so with all the success, and this is going to sort of come back to entrepreneurship because this is what I usually try and tie off the show with. All the success you've had, huge success across multiple different mediums. What keeps you going? Like you could quite easily just retire now and live a simple life and enjoy retirement, but as an industry leader, as an absolute living legend, what gets you up in the morning, keeps you pushing to open another bar in Italy and to keep expanding your knowledge and your footprint and influence?
I always say the shaker does not know how old you are. If you know how to shake, it's your beautiful musical instrument. So there is no age gap. As long as I get exciting. I learn from other. I learn from the young guy. You know, I learn the way. Every time I reopen up a bar or open a bar, I get all exciting because we start to think about, okay, what concept are we going to create? What design are we going to create? That's where my experience comes to life. But all my excitement, I don't feel my age. I'm as young as anyone could ever think. I love the industry. I've been doing this now for 55 years this year. 55 years it's a hell. It's a long do, and but hospitality is a beautiful thing, right? Caring for people, it is a beautiful thing. We are artists of work by all means. We are in the way of art. We are artists in the way of creating some incredible drink in a mixologist point of view to give a journey to somebody who's going to taste our creation, which is great. So we all, almost in the way you could say we are par with some of the greatest chefs that there is. Chef will create his own wonderful food in the plate. We use a glass, and we are incredible. Today young bartenders are very knowledgeable. They really care with this passion of bartending. It's not just a job, but it's a career, and it really pleased me that I maybe helped to do that. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I mean, today when we come out of this pandemia, people will be needing a going to the bar. The bar is one of the most social place that there is. It's a place where you feel alive. You don't feel on your own because there is always a bartender over the other side of the counter who will talk to you, who will look after you. So I always, over the years, I made my bar the home of many, many, many people who today they still follow me. I mean, I could, I could tell you many stories. I think I'd like to close this with just to show you. how wonderful this industry is with a story. Okay. As I said before, I've been blessed that I met many iconic people in our industry, in this world, from several presidents to Fidel Castro, Nelson Mandela, royalty. At one time, I used to be known as the royal bartender. I said it all, Princess Diana, Her Majesty, Princess Margaret, you name it. I've been there, and I made them, my world is my world. One day I had Robert De Niro walk in my bar, a good mate, he walks into the bar. As he walked into the bar, I welcome him, and he said, "Who is Salvatore?" And I say, "I am Salvatore." And he says, "But why people speak about you?" All my friends said, "Whenever I'm in London, I must come and see you." I said, "Well, Mr. De Niro, please take your cap off," because he had the basketball cap on, "and walk in, and you'll find out." And he did, and we are good mates. But the story I really want to tell you is that many years ago, I had the Stevie Wonder come into my bar, right? And me and Steve, we are good mates. And he comes to my bar, and one night I create a cocktail for him called Champagne Wonder after him, right? And he started enjoying my Champagne Wonder, so much so he started to listen to the pianist, to my piano player, Brian. And at one time he started to rock his head, and just listen to the music. So I went over to him and I say, "Steve, would you like to play?" And he said, "Yes, Salvatore, I would love to." Now imagine how magical it was for the people in my bar listen to Stevie Wonder play on my piano, right, in my bar piano, and you can't write that. But he didn't just write, sing one song and walk away. For over half an hour, he was there playing, and enjoyed himself, right? He felt at home. But the most beautiful thing it was that when he stood up to leave, and I went to say goodnight to him, he started to applaud, right? And I said, "Steve, what's that for?" And he said, "From one artist to another." And that's what we can be. As far as the biggest star in the world, if we love what we do, and I certainly love what I do.
Wow, that was a mic drop like I've never heard. Salvatore, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you to invite me to your show.
And I'm sure that very, very soon we'll see each other face to face.
Okay, God willing.
Thank you, Salvatore. Goodbye.
Ciao, ciao. God bless all. Okay, keep safe. Yeah, all of you. Okay.